Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We are amidst the happy times here. We're discussing a Tom Brady beatdown by the Baltimore Ravens on Monday night, 37-20. You know, Luke, it could have been much more of a blowout, right? Like without a Cyrus Jones fumble, without a Mark Ingram, you could say that along the pathway, but just on a defensive standpoint, because we praised Lamar, we're going to praise Lamar all week. We're playing Cincinnati, and we'll see how that goes. But defensively, to do what they did to Tom Brady at 20 points, at 10 points not scored off of turnovers, that might be unto itself as impressive as anything, given that it's Tom Brady. Now, I know the offensive line there had been some issues, and skill position players, and they're still bringing in Antonio Brown and bringing in Mohamed Sanu and these different players. But to stop them anytime, anywhere, the way the Ravens did, and there was some period in the second quarter where there was some pasture out there for sure, and Tom Brady took advantage of that. But on the whole, real nice night for the defense.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's as impressive as it's encouraging. I think we talked about this quite a bit last week. This isn't your typical New England offense. They have really benefited a great deal from how well their defense has played. They've gotten a couple special team scores this year, and they've been set up on short fields because that defense has created so many takeaways. I mean, it's just they've really been operating from an on-schedule benefactor kind of standpoint. I mean, they've just had great field position. They've had short fields. Their defense has scored touchdowns for them. So I don't know if it's so impressive, but because it is Tom Brady, because it is the Patriots, because we saw how mightily this defense struggled over the first month of the season, and we've seen steady incremental improvement since that Cleveland game, I think from that standpoint, the Ravens defense comes out of this game feeling really good about themselves. I mean, you look at that first quarter, New England ran 7 plays for 4 yards. Now, the Patriots moved the ball really well in the second quarter and the third quarter, but then you saw how the Ravens finished off the game in the fourth quarter. Brady throws the interception, and then on their last drive of the game, they moved the ball, I think it was 9 yards, and then they punted it away. So the bookend of what they did in the first quarter and the fourth quarter, and certainly they had issues with the hurry-up offense that kind of offset their pass rush that, they got after Tom Brady. That was good to see on the heels of what they did in the second half in Seattle. So I don't know if giving up 20 points to the Patriots offense this year is all that terribly impressive, but considering where this defense has been, I think it's that much more encouraging, and I think it's a confidence builder. And I think it felt much more like last year from the standpoint of just playing such complementary football. And I mean, sure, the turnovers really put them in some tough spots there with some sudden change situations in that second quarter, but they handled it really well overall. Held them to a field goal on the one drive that could have been a touchdown easily.
Well, it changed the temperature in the stadium. I mean, literally, the Cyrus Jones fumble, it took the wind out of their sails for a quarter and then some, and it turned what was a celebration into, holy hell, we got a real football game, and that's Tom Brady over there.
Exactly. So from that standpoint, I mean, they gave up some yardage. They gave up some points in the second and third quarter. It didn't look nearly as impressive. I mean, they were really tired in that third quarter. And part of that was they returned a fumble for a touchdown, so the offense wasn't on the field, so they were on the field for quite a bit there. But overall, even if this isn't the elite kind of Patriots offense that we've seen in many years with Tom Brady and company, it's still a really important performance for this defense, and I think it's just a case where they have a lot of new parts. This defense is clearly lacking some talent in some key areas.
Well, there is no Ray Lewis. There is no Ed Reed unless you count the guys with the gold jackets, right? Like, you look down at this team and say, all right, Earl Thomas, we hear he's a Hall of Famer. We know he used to be, but what is he going to do? And he winds up at the podium at the end. I mean, that's who you want to see at the podium at the end of the night. You want to see Earl Thomas there. You want to know that Marlon Humphrey had a game,
Sure, and let's throw Matthew Judon in there.
Sure.
I thought he played a whale of a football game.
Especially no McPhee anymore, too, right? So, I mean, there's
more
on
him. And that's part of it. I mean, we talk so much about the guys they've lost, or the guys they lost in the offseason, and the institutional knowledge, the Pro Bowls, the past production. But think about how much they've lost now since the start of training camp. The injuries in the secondary, Pernell McPhee for a pass rush that was already kind of lacking. So from that standpoint, these guys are still finding themselves, so to speak. And I thought what happened in Seattle was a great development for them as far as their confidence and meshing, and they have all these new parts. I mean, guys that they've signed since the season started, like Bynes and L.J. Ford and, Jihad Ward, different guys like that are playing real snaps for them. So I don't think this is going to be ultimately a top 3 defense, but I think it's certainly playing way, way better than it did back in September when they gave up over 1,000 yards to Kansas City and Cleveland and gave up, 73 points in a 2-week span. So they've come a long way in that regard. They still have a ways to go. They still have to show they can be consistent week to week. But yeah, when you see Tom Brady over there on the other side and you're able to hold that offense the way they did for stretches of that game at the very least, that does a lot for your confidence. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and talking about Matt Judon and talking about a pass rush and getting after quarterbacks, this is probably the time we need to talk about Deshaun Watson. This is the time we need to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. These are the things coming over the hill the next couple of weeks, because I'll be honest with you, you and I started talking about the big bad wolf of the 3,000-mile road trip to Russell Wilson, and gasp, bye week, and here comes Tom Brady, and oh my God, we got L.J. Ford, and we've got Josh Bynes, and what happened to Peanut, and boy, is Brandon Williams okay, and who's going to stop the run, and is Earl Thomas any good, and what did we do? There was all of that angst, right? And now on the back end of, you beat Russell Wilson, you beat Tom Brady, maybe this Watson-Garoppolo thing, and by the time Pittsburgh and Cleveland get around here at the end of the year, they're going to be in the fetal position, the whole deal, that once you beat Tom Brady and Russell Wilson, I'm not sure that there's anything left on the dance card here that, to your point, you use the word important. It was an important game for the defense, because lost in all of this is going to be Lamar's right, Lamar's left. Look at Lamar. What did Lamar say? Look at that move. Watch that highlight. And at the end of the day, Tom Brady, 10 points, not off turnovers, and dealing with the no huddle and giving a little bit but not giving too much, because when you watch the second quarter, you thought to yourself, wow, you're in against the big boys. And not only that, Belichick came in to run a no-huddle in our stadium because he knew it wasn't going to be loud enough.
Well, and not just because of the crowd noise, but also the way it wears out a defense, and we saw that. So,
somebody got to fake an injury. Don't they have that still in the playbook?
I know, right? Yeah, you especially you see that in college with so many teams running spread and no huddle and up tempo. But I think this was just such a good experience for them with all the new parts, with some young guys that they're counting on, with some guys who maybe aren't so young but are in roles that they're not accustomed to being. A guy like L.J. Ford, he's been mostly a role player in his career, and now with Patrick Owasso being back, and he played a whale of a game too. A sack, forced fumble, so let's mention him as far as some of the guys who stood out. But
he did stand out. Every time you looked up, he was flying to the ball. Where's 48, right?
And he's the kind of guy that's why when the Ravens moved him back to the weak side for that Pittsburgh game, and we haven't seen him because he suffered the high ankle sprain and toughed his way through that game. We haven't seen him since then, but that was another factor. If you're looking for ways to improve this pass rush internally, it was him moving back to the will spot. Because keep in mind, he had 5 sacks from that weak side inside backer position last year, because it's a little more of a downhill position. I don't want to say you take the thinking out of it, but let's just say there's a little less pre-snap responsibility than if you're playing the Mike linebacker spot like Josh Bynes is. So it's just allowed Owasso to play a little bit faster, and the Ravens, they need that. They need some guys that can kind of play with their hair on fire a little bit. When you have so many new pieces, so many new parts, and you're trying to make that mesh, you have to be careful that there isn't too much thinking going on the field and not enough playmaking ability. So that was something good to see. But I mean, I just think, to your point that you made, understanding what's ahead. Deshaun Watson, who is another quarterback playing at an MVP caliber level. You look at Garoppolo. The Rams are kind of tough to figure out, but we know that offense, at the very least, has played at a high level at various times in the last couple of years. So that's not going to be easy. But I think when you're talking about 2 Super Bowl winning quarterbacks that you've taken down in consecutive games, it just makes everything else feel a little less imposing, a little less intimidating, a little less daunting, and those experiences you can draw on the rest of the year. I mean, they're going to go through some times here over the next 7-8 games where things are going to be rocky, and they're probably going to lose a couple more games. I don't think they're going to go 14-2, although I'm not sure that they're going to lose too many more games.
Yeah, once you beat Tom Brady and you beat Russell Wilson, you start to look at it and you do start doing the quarterback math, literally. And I know we have an MVP candidate. I heard our fans say that.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely have an MVP candidate, but they're going to be going up against another MVP candidate in a couple weeks, and the defense is still going to have some hiccups. And even if this team loses a couple games here in some of these difficult games that still to come, you have these experiences now to draw from and say, hey, if you lose to Houston, if you lose to the Rams, if you lose to San Francisco, now I'm not saying they're going to lose to all those teams, but if that happens where you go through some adversity, you now have these real-life experiences this season, not talking about the Ravens of old or success of yesteryear, but this season they have those kind of wins where you just say, guys, we're fine. Look what we did then. Everything's going to be okay, and that's where this win's not just important in terms of beating the Patriots and being in the number 2 seed spot currently in the AFC, but it makes everything else seem a little less intimidating, and it's really at a point now where every other team is now looking at the Ravens on their schedule and saying, boy, that's going to be a really difficult challenge for us. And that's just the nature of the beast when you're 6-2 for the first time in quite a while. So these are exciting times, and while Lamar Jackson and the offense will continue to get the headlines, and frankly they should, with the way that they performed against a defense that was giving up just over 7 points per game going into Week 9. But this Baltimore defense is certainly playing way better than it did roughly about a month ago, and I think that's where everyone feels more confident that the Ravens can continue this run that they're on with their first 4-game winning streak in 6 years.
We talk about defense, and you talk about L.J. Fort, you talk about Josh Bond, you talk about Marcus Peters, and I know you retweeted the Marshall Yonda dumping upside down of Eric DeCosta in the locker room after the game, and how much fun everybody's having. But more than that, after beating Bill Belichick here, after beating Tom Brady, after beating an undefeated team, there's a part of this for me where you say, Belichick's going to devise something, right? Belichick's going to have a game plan. He's going to be waiting. There's also a point where the Ravens did some self-scouting and had an extra week. You talk about how Belichick after the bye, a playoff game. He never loses that first playoff game. He has 2 weeks. He scans you up and down, and he's ready for you. I have a feeling that 2 weeks down for the Patriots was a good thing for John Harbaugh and his staff. And, I want to give a little doff of the cap to John Harbaugh here for surviving the Joe Flacco era. This time last year, he was getting fired, remember? Everybody was writing that he was at the end and he'd be coaching the Packers this year or whatever it was going to be. The Dolphins, whoever waved money around, he and Bisciotti had come to the end of their road and all of this other stuff. And yet we look up here, we have a first-place team. We look like we're going to be playing football again in January. We have the most exciting player in the sport. That's management, right? Like, they went out and said, we're going to draft this kid that nobody else wants. We're going to turn our whole team upside down. We're going to turn all of our personnel around. We're going to run the football like a college team. We're going to spread it out. We're going to draft guys nobody else wants because who would give Nick Boyle $3-4 million a year? Well, we will. Who's going to give Willie Snead $6 million a year? Well, we will, because that's the kind of team we're going to be. We're going to go sign Mark Ingram because He's going to be cheaper than Ezekiel Elliott or name the running back that you would prefer to have, Barkley, whatever, right? But the coaching part of this is that here we are again the day after another beatdown of Bill Belichick, one of them coming at the hands of Joe Flacco 7-8 years ago up in New England. But when you beat Bill Belichick, when you're 12, 13 years into a Super Bowl winning resume, there's a part of it where when the Ravens get off the bus in Cincinnati, where there's Zach Taylor now trying to figure out, how the shoes are laced there in Southern Ohio, and all of these other games that we're going to go into, the Ravens, and we don't talk about it around here, but when we get off the bus, we probably got the better coaching staff than you do most weeks.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair, and I think we talked about this a lot with Wink Martindale taking over for Dean Pease and what that did for the defense and kind of transforming it, making it a little more dynamic, and certainly John Harbaugh, overseeing all of it, but what's happened on the offensive side of the ball. Let's face it, and we've talked about this before, so that we don't need to belabor the point, but it's not as though the Ravens traded up with their original first-round pick to take Lamar Jackson. They traded back a couple times. They took Hayden Hurst, and then they traded back into the first round to get Lamar Jackson with the 32nd overall pick. So that right there tells you that the Ravens weren't at all, they weren't completely convinced that Lamar Jackson was going to be an MVP candidate and this transcendent franchise.
Like they were with Flacco, where they had the deal into the teens and go down. Right.
I got you. So that shows you right there that, they thought that there was some experimental aspect to what they were going to do here, but they figured, hey, it's essentially a second-round pick when you kind of look at how it broke down with trading with Philadelphia, and they took a shot. But what made it so impressive was you didn't just do that and then you tried to fit a square peg into a round hole. You said, all right, if we're going to do this, let's make Greg Roman the offensive coordinator. And with all due respect to Marty Morningwig, Greg Roman's coached Colin Kaepernick and coached Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo and has experience working with mobile quarterbacks. And let's go out and bring David Culley in, who is someone who has a lot of coaching experience and worked with Andy Reid and taken some of those RPO principles and some of those things, and doing all the work they did in the off season, where they brought in a Paul Johnson, a former Navy lore, and talked to other college coaches that ran different elements at the collegiate level and picked their brain as far as how to teach offense to young college kids, and figuring, well, the Ravens have a lot of young players who aren't that all far removed from college. So there were just so many layers, so much to this entire process, and the way that they put it all together, it was all about what's going to put Lamar Jackson in position to have the greatest chance of success. And that's not to say that Lamar doesn't deserve most of the credit for his improvement, but all of these elements have been put into place to completely enhance what he does well and to minimize the things that he doesn't do as well. Let's face it. When you look at the passes that he made in Sunday night's game, he made some great throws. There's no question about it, but most of it is the kind of throws where he's taking what the defense is giving him, shorter throws, creating open looks. You're not asking him to make a ton of tight window throws, although we've seen him make those this year as well. But
there are only 6 times in the game where the ball hit the ground, right? And he's only throwing the ball 23 times, not 53 times. So
exactly,
you're on a percentage basis, you're not asking him to do as much, and the throws are, by their very nature, much safer.
Right, exactly, and that's what you want and that's good. That's not a knock on him. That's a good thing. You're putting this kid in position to play his absolute best football, and we talked about this in a previous conversation. He's done such a good job of mastering that sweet spot between wanting to make big plays but also valuing the football, and that's the biggest thing with me that's been impressive with him this year is how well he's taken care of the football in the midst of being this dynamic playmaker. So many young guys, it's kind of one or the other. You either have the guy that is going to be safe and smart with the ball, but probably isn't going to make a ton of plays, or you're going to have the guy that Baker Mayfield was last year. Made a ton of big plays, made a ton of big-time throws, but he did turn the ball over a lot. So to have that sweet spot with him, whether it's throwing the ball or when he's taking off and running, we've talked about how he's been so smart, he's so nimble, so agile, where he can avoid the big hits. He doesn't take that many big hits, and we'll continue to talk about that. And there's always going to be a risk, just like there's a risk when the ball's in any player's hand on any given play. But all of that, I think, has just been so well coached. The offense is so well structured, and you give John Harbaugh and this entire staff so much credit because it is different from other teams in the league. It's not as though they reinvented football here. These are elements that have been there, and so many of these elements are cyclical. Different things that the Ravens are doing at the NFL level have been done in previous eras. You might need to go back a few decades to see some of these principles that now you kind of think of as quote college kind of offense, but it's all very well structured and they committed to it, and I think that's what's so impressive, and that's where, as much as we talk about the quote running quarterback, this I think has the good chance to continue to succeed for the long run because they aren't trying to make Jackson something that he isn't. They're leaning into what he does well, and they've really structured it in a way that they're getting him to play his absolute best football. And I kind of look at what he's doing, and he's got a full year worth of starts now. He's 22 years old. He's still scratching the surface, which is pretty darn scary for the rest of the NFL when you think about it. But I just think to kind of pivot, and you think back to what they did last year during the bye week. Flacco hurt. The team was 4-5, and they just said, "Hey, let's do this, and we're going to do it. We're going to go all in on it. We're going to transform our offense." And from that point to the off-season work to what we're seeing now a year later, it is pretty impressive. And again, it begins, and it's so successful because you have such a transcendent kind of athlete, a transcendent kind of young talent at the quarterback position. And we'll see how it plays out. And as I've said, I'm sure there's still going to be some bumpy times and some rocky performances because that's what happens with young quarterbacks. But boy, he's really playing at a high MVP caliber level, as Earl Thomas mentioned multiple times in his post-game press conference. And you have to give this coaching staff their due with putting in a system that has really nurtured him and allowed Lamar Jackson to be himself, and the Ravens are now really reaping the benefits of that.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. We are getting ready for Cincinnati this week and trying to make heads or tails of a parade on Saturday. Did they have I think I skipped that, Luke. I missed that. I was watching college football or something like that over the weekend. But we'll get on to some baseball, but it's all football around here. It's another Purple Week. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Charles Nusinoff & Sons. Sydney's over there. Now, my wife, she busted up her wedding ring about a year and a half ago. Broke it in half, and Sid said, I can fix it, because that's what they do there. Stop and see our friends out of Charles Nusinoff & Sons. You can find them on the web, or you can find them right on 695-410-661-5050. Jewelry, watches, engagement rings, custom designs, and yes, if you break it, they can fix it. It's what they do. They've got an awesome set of tools. Charles Nusinoff & Sons. Find them at charlesnusinoff.com. Also, lots of pals all around the Beltway, including Dave up at Full Circle Tire and Auto. Weather has changed. The clock has changed. For $39.95, you can still get a full vehicle inspection, including an oil change and a tire rotation. Check them out. They're up at 2133 North Fountain Green Road in Bel Air. It's Full Circle Tire and Auto. You can find them on Facebook as well. Johnny D. I bet right now Johnny D is mixing up some victory shrimp salad and a turkey salad and fresh turkey. Always fresh turkey over at Johnny D's. Everything is homemade, and the catering hall is free and available at all times if you need a catering hall function. Proudly serving Parkville since 1954. It's Johnny D's Lounge. Find them at johnnydslounge.com. We're getting back up to Adams Jeep and Adams Jeep Motorsports, where they have a lifetime warranty on lift kits, and they can build your dream Jeep. Give Galen a call up there, 410-879-5800, and build your dream Jeep today. We're going to have a dream event up there. I am working on several events at Adams Jeep, so stay tuned. Things are happening. Might even have Big Matt Skura blocking, knocking people over up there. I was at Roost Chris last week. Atlanta Pier 5. I have not been up to Pikesville recently. Haven't been to Odenton in quite some time, and I don't get to Annapolis a ton, but I do pretty much hang out like the Fonz over at Pier 5. Plan your private event at Roost Chris. Yes, they have happy hour specials. Yes, they have meal deals. If you haven't been to Roost Chris lately, this is a great week to do it. It's Light City, my favorite event in Baltimore. Come on down, have dinner. We'll see you down at Roost Chris. Last but never least, got to tell you about our friends at Sporticulture. I've got the lava lamp here. It's actually a little warm. The Victory Lava Lamp. You can find it at sporticulture.com. You can also find them out at Poor Boys, where, of course, my pals out Court and everybody out at Walnut Springs, beautiful flowers, but the flowers aren't evergreen and eternal here. My lava lamp is. So Court thought the lava lamp would look good on the set. Hey, I tell you what, we've been in first place ever since I got the lava lamp from Sporticulture. So I'm feeling good about that. The Lee Tessier team hotline is always here at WNST.net. No risk to you. He will let you out of your contract at any time if he is your realtor. That is how convinced he is that he's going to be able to sell your place. And certainly if you're in the market to buy, no one does it better than the Lee Tessier team. Call Lee, 410-638-9555, or go to leetessier.com. Yes, they're in Bel Air, but they do it all around the Baltimore metropolitan area. I tell you what, first place, we've got Light City. We've got, I get to go to Cincinnati and eat chili this weekend. It's fantastic. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.